Welcome to another Coffee with Developers. I'm here with Brian Whippo from the Algorand Foundation, and I first have to congratulate you on your family name. It's just a name where you just feel happy when you hear it.
It
Like,
is nice. It is
where's
fun.
it from?
It's an English name. It's like a bastardization of Whipple.
Oh, okay,
Yeah,
not bad.
got lost in
You-
translation somewhere across the Atlantic.
Yeah, and you're based in the US right now, and your background is blurry. That's why it's actually everything is moving fast there, so that's why it's blurry, I guess.
Yeah, we move fast here. I don't waste any time.
Now, Brian Whippo works for the Algorand Foundation, and last year at the World Congress, I interviewed your former boss, or still boss, I'm not quite sure,
Yep.
about what the Algorand Foundation is, and it talked all about like that it's about blockchain and all the bits around that. And whenever I started to talk about blockchain, my eyes start glazing over, and I'm getting like, yeah, God, again.
Right.
It's not the hype that it used to be. Now we have a new one. We have got the AI hype, but that's a good thing, I think. So if you can just reiterate to us, what is the problem that blockchain is solving, or is there actually is it still in need for a problem to solve?
Yeah, that's a great question. And we are very self-aware about our location in the Gartner hype cycle, right? We are not in the hype cycle anymore. And I'd venture to say that the vast majority of people would say we're in the trough of disillusionment down here. And what we hope to convey is that actually there's a lot of quiet work going on in the background, and we're working our way back up the slope of enlightenment towards the plateau of productivity as it goes. And to answer your question about the problems that blockchain can solve, this is an area where I think at the foundation and across the industry, we're getting to be very realistic about the problems for which blockchain is a good solution. And it's not most things, it's certain things. And they generally fall into three categories, right? Where you want to disintermediate some market, take a middleman out of the equation, or you want to use the public nature of public blockchain to write data so that it can be verified publicly. This comes up a lot in like supply chain transparency commitments and things like this. And then it also is infrastructure, right? This is a distributed database and can be Rails to enable business models that were not possible through traditional technology models. And we see a lot of sort of tokenization or digitization of assets. And sometimes that means fractionalizing them into small pieces so that people can transact in things in markets where they might not have been able to do that due to transaction costs and traditional models. So we work quietly in the background to try to fit public blockchain to these use cases where it really makes sense. And I think with the coming sort of regulatory maturation around digital assets, some of this stuff is going to come back to the fore in a more visible way.
So what, I mean, there's lots of terms being thrown around, and when the hype was on, everything was the same thing. Everything was blockchain, and then crypto was part of blockchain, and then there was like Web3, and there was these kind of things. So what can you say about that nomenclature? Like these, what are the different bits? Like how is it related to blockchain? How is blockchain related to Bitcoin, to digital currencies? How is
Right.
it related to Web3? Where are the boundaries, or is it all like marketing terms thrown at us?
I think they're more than marketing terms, to be fair. Right? Bitcoin is to blockchain as in the US, we would say Kleenex is to facial tissue. It's sort of like the brand that everyone uses to refer to the general concept. Um, and it did sort of break open the blockchain technology space in a big way. But then, Ethereum and programmable money came after that, and then I like to describe a number of blockchains that came later in like the late teens, or, early 2020s as sort of like third generation blockchains. And crypto's become a little bit of a dirty word. It is conflated with speculatory investment in all sorts of crypto assets, some of which have use and some of which don't, quite frankly. And we try to stay away from that outside of technology reference to cryptography. And Web3, which you mentioned, is, I think it's a compelling concept. It has a little bit of a cringe association with that term. I've heard people say, the Web 2 is not being deprecated by Web 3, right? Web 3 is not replacing the internet as we know it. But there is something to be said for having custody of a digital asset, or some some kind of identity or value yourself, rather than it belonging purely to a corporate entity. And I would say, I think it's Chris Dixon's book, Read, Write, Own, is a good exploration of this concept, that there's like sort of like a new generation of technology and applications within this Web3 concept. And the values, I think, are worth understanding, even if the language can be a bit off-putting at times. So that's sort of how I think about that. And going forward, we hope to educate more and more technologists that using a distributed database, right? That language is, sort of divorced from blockchain and crypto and all of that, can be a useful tool in some situations.
Yeah, the ownership is an interesting one. I mean, this is where also weird things like NFT come in that just basically came and fizzled out really quickly. And it felt like scammy. And at the same time, you saw things like Sotheby's and like other classical old companies starting to embrace it as well, because they realized that the value of being able to pinpoint the ownership of something and carry that to the next user with a history of it is a valuable asset in terms
Right.
of like making sure that that data doesn't get lost. It always feels to me that fintech and financial distribution and systems were completely disconnected from the rest of the world. I
Hmm.
remember when I worked in tangentially, like basically for an agency, and we had to work with SOAP back then and XML
Right.
APIs and these kind of things, because everything that we needed, every transaction had to be signed and verified on the other end. So I guess this is the one thing that actually blockchain makes easier than we had to do back then, and takes away that enterprisey price label that we put on everything, because a SOAP server was, you could set up one yourself, but normally had to hire it from somebody else as well.
Right. Yeah, and you made an interesting point there, and I think blockchain as Rails and as a protocol to transfer value is going to send transaction fees to zero eventually. And you see this in a lot of industries, right? As technology advances, the cost of doing simple things trends to zero, and then businesses provide value through other services and other value adds. And we're going to see that with the sort of the, like I mentioned earlier, the regulatory maturation of digital assets. And I believe Congress may approve a bill today to regulate stablecoins. So, US dollar stablecoins could become like a proper first class asset in the financial world. And, those things run on blockchain, and it doesn't have to be scary. It can just be a sort of a new generation of technology to enable value transfer.
It feels like we had that though. Like I remember I saw cash points with Bitcoin on it and nobody used them. And like, I mean, you can't use them anymore when you see the value of Bitcoin now. Like what would you get out of that? Like, please pay me out $100,000 for my Bitcoin, or I don't know. Like it felt like the infrastructure of banks that we had tried to actually jump on that bandwagon, but then realized like, wait, no, that's not actually something we want to do. Now, what is a stable coin and what's the difference to a Bitcoin?
Good question. So I'll start with Bitcoin. Right, Bitcoin is a first-class digital asset that runs on the Bitcoin network, and it has value that is determined essentially by markets, right? Price discovery in trading markets. If people want to pay $104,000 for Bitcoin, then it's worth $104,000 at this particular moment, and it can be used for fees and to transfer value within that network. A stable coin is this concept that you take a fiat currency like a euro, Great British pound, US dollar, etc., and you create a digital representation of that on a blockchain. And the stablecoin's value, it can float actually. So because they're redeemable for €1 or dollar, then the value of a stablecoin stays very, very, very close to €1 or $1 on chain. And if people want to, to trade, they can sort of arbitrage the price back to what it's ultimately redeemable for, which is a normal fiat dollar or euro that we use in our everyday lives. Now, another type of coin that is becoming more popular is what might be called a money token, where the value of it doesn't float at all. It can never diverge even a thousandth of a cent from the underlying currency. So, like a euro money token is just always worth €1, period, and it has no ability to depeg from the price of the underlying currency. So there's multiple models that are being used in markets today to represent digitally on chain some traditional asset, and in this case, just the fiat currency that we use day in and day out.
Now, if I want to get started in that whole thing, I always felt lost. I felt like, okay, where do I start putting things on the blockchain, and why would I?
That is a great question. This is something that, as an industry, I think has taken a lot longer than anyone expected to get right. The user experience of on ramping money onto blockchain is still rough. There's basically two types of businesses that do this. There's the centralized exchanges, Coinbase, Binance, that people will have heard of, and you can open an account. They're going to ask for a bunch of information for you, and you can make a bank transfer. They provide other methods as well, and they will essentially onboard or on ramp your value to the blockchain. And then there are companies that do this that are not exchanges, but they will just put you through some KYC checks. Got to take a picture of like your passport or your driver's license and make sure you're who you say you are, and they'll let you make that transfer and then put your value on chain. And there's a lot of steps in the process, and it's still high friction, and there's a lot of opportunity there to make that easier for people. And one additional sort of technical frontier would be to create digital identities that you can reuse. So like you don't have to go through this KYC process and take a picture of your face and your driver's license over and over again as you create accounts in various places, but you can do this once essentially and then take a digital representation of your ID and present it to a business and say, hey, this is who I am. I don't need to go through all this rigmarole again. And they would be able to verify that against a government entity that issued your ID in the first place, for example. But there's still a lot of friction there.
I remember in Mozilla, we did a lot of stuff like that, like digital identity on blockchain. And then all the people, when Mozilla downsized them, went to block and did things there as well. So that seems to be a company that does that as well. I like the idea because the original idea that we had on the web, and also we have with other things like PWAs and like getting extra information or extra access to hardware, is connected to a domain. And a domain is not necessarily a safe space, because you see so many companies having security problems when their domains run out and they forgot to refresh them. These kind of things that cannot happen with a blockchain-based identity, right?
Yeah, blockchain, it's interesting that you mentioned domains. It can be very, very useful for this because when you go back to this concept of self-custody and the ownership of keys, you can essentially guarantee through some security best practices that somebody is not going to be able to to take your keys and take your identity or your domain or whatever. And there's actually some people that are working on using sort of blockchain multi-signature verification to protect domain names so that it's not possible to attack a registrar in or use like social engineering to take control of a domain, but you would actually have to have access to somebody's like hardware wallet that they use to keep their crypto keys. Um, so there's a lot of opportunity here, and I think there's there's some movement to adopt industry standards, but we're not quite there yet. Where you know, federal, state, local government agencies are all lined up to recognize these things, and businesses are prepared to recognize these things. So I think it's another like identity is another example where we're in this like quiet post hype cycle phase, but there's actually a lot of work going on where people are in that long sales cycle, in the long government relations cycle, laying the groundwork for a new era around this stuff.
One big criticism of and not blockchain in itself, but crypto especially, was the waste of electricity. Like there was crypto mining, like people actually use things. I mean, my favorite example was the one from where Airbnbs now have a paragraph in the listing that you shouldn't crypto mine while you're there, because one of them had like 10,000 euro electricity bill because somebody stayed in there for 3 days or something. So is that still an issue? And I mean, in the world of AI, it's probably not that much of a concern anymore, but still it's cumulative. Like the more technology we use that wastes energy, the more energy we use. So I mean, while AI is probably the biggest offender, there is still a lot of stuff going on in blockchain and the crypto world that uses a lot of electricity. Has there been mediation on that? Has that become better, or is it still an issue?
On many fronts, it has become much better. In Bitcoin, the security of the network is actually achieved through expending energy, right? So the mining process involves running a bunch of processors to solve a math problem and at scale, and that's what uses a lot of electricity. Many other blockchains, Algorand among them, operate on a proof of stake model where you don't have to do a bunch of computation to participate in the network and propose blocks and confirm transactions, all of that. And they use a tiny fraction of the electricity that Bitcoin does, and it's basically negligible. And one of the things we do at the Algorand Foundation, we also buy some carbon offsets for the small amount of impact that we have by running this distributed network. We offset that as well. So there's my marketing spiel. But this is an interesting topic, and a friend of mine the other day made an offhand comment about wanting to answer a question we were talking about in a conversation using AI, and she was like, "Oh, I don't know if it's worth killing a tree to answer that question." Right? So this is a non-technical person, but there is an understanding, I think, in the general public that these technology tools, be they blockchain, AI, just traditional applications that run on enterprise grade data center hardware, consume a lot of electricity. So it's not necessarily a terrible problem. There's lots of ways to generate green power, whether it be solar, wind, nuclear, hydroelectric, and so forth. And I would say, I think it's incumbent upon all of us, wherever you live, to participate in political conversations about energy infrastructure, because this is going to be the constraining factor of this century with things like AI, right? The price of energy and how it's moved around the world is going to be a really key factor geopolitically.
Well, one thing that I found interesting in that space is, as well as you said, like math problems and encryption and cryptography, with the rise of quantum computing. Is it still as safe as we want it to, as we say it is? Because I mean, the whole thing about blockchain was like, oh, it's much safer because there's a verification for everything. But when you have like computers that are in a state in between 0 and 1 that can be moving much faster than we did before, does the crypto world have to catch up with that kind of innovation, or is that the next hype and we don't have as much quantum computing as we actually say?
That's an excellent question. We talk a lot about quantum security in the blockchain and crypto world. And long story short is there's an array of algorithms that are used in cryptography. Some of them are already understood to not be sort of safe against quantum attacks. And if these quantum computers continue to advance at the rate they are advancing, it would become pretty trivial to break, encryption and signatures and so forth. But there are other algorithms out there, and one of the things that Algorand did early on was incorporated Falcon signatures that are used to essentially verify the history of the chain. And this algorithm is a lot more resistant to quantum attacks. And there are other algorithms as well. So they're not all created equal. And across the industry, the smart people are thinking about how to incorporate more quantum resistant algorithms. And I think there's going to be essentially an upgrade wave. And some chains will adapt and upgrade and incorporate quantum resistance, and some will not, and they will probably be exploited at some point in the next 5 to 10 years.
When you say history, that's another thing. Like as far as I understood it, that blockchain is accumulative. Like the more you do it, the more history entries are there. that makes me worried about size. Like the more interactions are on one blockchain, the bigger it will get. So is there a way to, or what's the thinking on that? Like, do we
Yeah.
still think, okay, it can grow forever, or is there any way we can compact DIs, take all history things out to make sure that it's not just getting bigger and bigger every time we do something with it, especially in a world where microtransactions are happening all the time?
This is something that we think about for the long-term sustainability of our protocol. And there's a couple of elements here. I think one is that the full history of the chain is not necessary to do the next transaction. And on many networks, you can run a light node or a light validator, and it doesn't need the entire history of the chain. It just needs the current state and maybe a brief history to be able to work. And so that full, ever accumulating history, ever growing data storage becomes essentially a specialized offering, and it will be useful for you know forensic investigative purposes. It will be useful for tax reporting, analytic services, and so forth. And we already see businesses springing up around providing history of blockchain data. But for the vast majority of users and applications, it's not really necessary to hold all of that data. And there's a lot of work going on to think about how to compress state or slice it up into pieces so that different people can host different chunks of the data history and so forth. And you just want to make sure that the people that are storing this data can be trusted, or you can verify that they're providing the historical data to you accurately when you need it. So there's a lot of problems to solve there. Um, but I will say on many chains, especially the later generations of blockchains, the data is very, very compressed. And even on Algorand, the entire history of the chain is just a few terabytes, which, compared to the size of data stored by many enterprises is not a ton. Right? If you think about the logging that big businesses do on all of their activities.
Well, I mean, what they do with the logs is the other thing. Like, I mean, it's actually more AI bots looking through those than people by now, it seems. But yeah, it was always a thing. Like, keep everything, and store it somewhere, and then we go from there. And then you ran
Right.
out of the location in all kind of systems as well. Now, you are a foundation, and I
Yeah.
remember talking about this. Does that hinder or does that help your ways of telling people about adopting the blockchain? Do they expect a commercial company, or do they think like, yeah, actually the commercial companies have been disappointing us, like a foundation might be something that's more future proof?
That is a very interesting question. And there's a couple different facets to this. One is that when we go to conferences and talk to software developers outside of the Web3 or crypto bubble, they often assume we are a for-profit company and that I'm selling them something at the booth. And we're not. And we explain we're a foundation. We have a treasury that was funded many years ago. And our mission is to promote the adoption of this technology and try to create a vibrant and sustainable ecosystem. And they're like, oh, okay, interesting. So you're not selling me something immediately, even though there are fees to use the chain. So that model is kind of unfamiliar to a lot of folks. Um, I think there is an element of certain people, certain businesses want to take advantage of these decentralized technologies that are less corporate, so that they're not beholden to mega corporations to run their businesses. That makes sense in certain cases. The other thing with foundations that's come into the discourse recently is that in crypto, a lot of the foundations were created as these nonprofits, sometimes in tax haven jurisdictions, because they needed to stay away from the regulatory perimeter of major developed economies. So it was a workaround. But as I mentioned earlier in our chat, there's a lot of regulatory maturation happening, better policy writing. Crypto and blockchain digital assets are coming out of the black markets and the gray markets and are going to become sort of first class regulated things. And that is where we may see different types of entities in developed countries spring up where they are for profit. And maybe that's actually a good thing. This is a sort of a discussion item at the moment because um, foundations can exist to serve their mission, but sometimes if you believe in capitalism, you might say maybe a for-profit entity is actually best incentive aligned to drive the adoption of a technology. So, without taking a strong view one way or the other, I think both of these approaches have merit.
Yeah, I think the longevity of a foundation or a non-for-profit is a good thing. The academic nature of it sometimes can be a hindrance. I saw it in the W3C with web adoption. Like the web could be much more than it is right now. It's still a great thing. It's still almost impossible to remove. But we're not using it the way we defined it, and that was because for-profit companies said like the web is like, let's show you lots of ads, and hopefully you click on them, and then we make money with it, and that's basically that. And that's not what the web was supposed to be. So it's an interesting approach. In terms of customers that you work with, like you said, you go to conferences, you talk to developers. Do you have any corporate partners or enterprise partners that might be interesting that people don't know about that are embracing blockchain already?
Yeah. So we see a whole range of customers. I would say the very largest corporates are sort of like just catching up with a lot of blockchain stuff, but we've seen a lot of announcements just recently with big names like Stripe and PayPal and Shopify and so forth. On Algorand, we have, as an example, a partnership with one of our wallets to issue a Mastercard debit card that's like works like any normal debit card, and you can spend the stablecoin funds that you've got in your wallet through a Mastercard issued by Immersive, and it's being rolled out around the world. And there are companies in the medical field using the blockchain to record data in a publicly verifiable way, like lab trace. And then sort of on the smaller end of the scale, we have a lot of startups. As with any disruptive technology, you see a lot of kind of small and medium-sized businesses adopt first. And one of my personal favorites to talk about is a company called Lofty, and they fractionalize shares of ownership of houses. So you can be a real estate investor, and they basically use blockchain to tokenize the ownership shares, and then people also vote to manage the properties on chain using sort of like DAO, another kind of blockchain jargon term. But they're using the chain to enable those experiences for people and kind of open up real estate investing in small chunks. And then there's like companies like Hisab Pay. This probably won't be known to your audience because they're in Afghanistan, but they are enabling everyday payments through apps and point of sale terminals in stores where there really wasn't a traditional banking infrastructure. So sometimes what we see in countries is skipping a generation of technology, and they just blow right past having traditional banks, and they go to mobile first and digital first infrastructure. And if I can throw out sort of a buzz fact, we understand that something like 30% of electricity bills in Afghanistan are being paid using Hisab Pay and running on Algorand rails. So these are a few examples where people are doing things in their everyday lives, buying stuff, investing in properties, managing them, and they're running on blockchain. And I might add, often without the users knowing, which kind of goes back to the hype cycle, right? We're in this like quiet phase of building up again without the hype. But I think this is kind of okay and to be expected because at the end of the day, it's a distributed database and users don't care. They don't need to know about this stuff. So the best solutions are going to abstract all that technical complexity away and just solve people's problems in an elegant way.
Hmm. I remember in Africa there used to be like micropayments over SMS, and they weren't even
Yeah,
sending the SMS; they were just sending the headers, and like using a signature in the header as well. Same with HTTP headers on websites and stuff. And that was basically when the infrastructure was so slow and so bad that
right.
the connectivity was hardly there. But it was powerful. It was empowering people to actually be able to sell things and buy things. And I lived in India for a while, and I saw the entrepreneurship of people just opening a something in the street, just selling random things. And
Yep.
it was just great to see that there's this drive to do that kind of stuff, and not like, oh, I want to be a millionaire with it. I'm just like, oh, I want to sell something. Now, you've just been at a front end conference at in Amsterdam.
Yeah.
Uh, Now, me as a JavaScript TypeScript Perl PHP developer.
Okay.
What can I use that Algorand offers to get me up to speed to use the blockchain or the distributed database of things? Because when I talk about distributed databases, I think of Cosmos DB or something like that. And then I was always like, oh, you got to use C#. And I'm like, I'm out.
Right.
So,
Let her buy.
so what did you show? What did you show there? And what can you get from Algorand to get started and to start playing with that as well?
We've done one thing in two ways to try to make this technology more accessible to people. And the one thing that we did is we created a compiler because we understood from lots of developer feedback that they did not want to learn another language, right? This is a huge intellectual hurdle, and the vast majority of blockchains do require you to learn like Solidity or Rust or Move or something else. And that's a hurdle for people who really don't have a lot of time or desire to do this. So we created a compiler. It's called Puya. And what it enables you to do is write the programs for blockchain. We call them smart contracts in TypeScript, which we released this year. We also have Python. And so people can write these smart contracts in syntactically and semantically correct TypeScript and Python. And then our compiler handles turning it into machine code that runs on the blockchain through like 7 levels of transformation. But as a developer, you can add this skill, this tool to your tool set without having to learn another language. And the reactions that I got from people at JS Nation and React Summit were like, oh, wow, I really appreciate that. So it's resonated with the folks that we've taken it to this spring already. And it makes me excited as a DevRel to go out there and meet people where they are instead of saying, oh, we have this cool thing. Oh, and by the way, you have to learn a whole language to use it, which is a non-starter.
Well, one thing that is also very confusing and very annoying is payment systems. Like basically, okay, you talked about Stripe, PayPal earlier. I mean, people give PayPal a bad rep, but it's the one that worked since 2001. Like, and basically, and I always felt like all the money I have on PayPal from like courses and things like that felt to me like a digital wallet because that money never existed, kind of thing. Like it was just like getting it there and connecting it with my Android Pay and these kind of things. But every time you do that, there's transaction costs and there's weirdness of signing up for it. And as a European, I wanted to use Stripe, I couldn't. Like these kind of things. So, do you think that is one thing where blockchain and your systems may be a faster way to get payment systems in, or does it need adoption from the main market first?
Well, there will definitely need to be adoption. One thing that this is just the world according to Brian, I think is missing from the whole equation is to break open mainstream adoption of digital assets, let's say stable coins, is people need to get paid, right? So they don't have to go through this on-ramping experience and like onboarding their money. Like that's silly. We should not have to do that. But at some point, there'll be a tipping point and people will say to their employer, like, actually, I prefer to be paid in stablecoin because this is easier for me. And the payroll processors and the HR systems are going to start to support this. And in my view, that's going to be the tipping point. And then once you have that, it unlocks all these abilities to do simple payments where blockchain infrastructure lets you do this for a fraction of a cent instead of having a payment processor, scrape a percent off the top. And then also sort of as like a second order opportunity, you get all this programmability. And there's a lot of businesses out there that are creating everything from escrow capabilities so that people can deal with each other and use escrow accounts, which are typically not accessible to normal people. They're for like big real estate transactions and businesses and so forth. Or, and this is like really frontier, people may be able to use their digital assets to give their AI agent a budget to go do stuff for them and make purchases. And this is something I'm going to touch on in my talk at WeAreDevelopers because we've got multiple frontiers of technological disruption going on. And this AI agent concept is very quickly going to evolve into an agent that can not just Google stuff for you or write you a summary, but it can actually go buy stuff and transact with other agents. And so we're going to need a technology foundation and the appropriate protocols to enable that, just like early internet protocols enabled everything we work with today.
Well, I mean, credit card companies are working on similar things. I mean, I think Visa, already announced that they have an AI agent that can buy things for you, which scared the hell out of me. Because I mean, the other thing is, I mean, in America you got like digital credit cards, much like you got like digital SIM cards. In Europe, they're all physical. You actually cannot have those. You cannot have a credit card that you put money on. You basically have to have just connected to a bank account, and that's a regulatory thing. There's just no way around it at the moment. Now, in terms of these kind of things, is there a way to get like throwaway accounts, throwaway budgets, kind of things that you can or and then actually say like, okay, as you said, like this agent gets like $50, but he has no chance to actually connect to other things. Where's the security layer in that one? Is there a fire and forget kind of part of blockchain as well?
That's a great question. So recently, back in April, we had a developer retreat, and a couple of groups of people hacked on this exact question. And there's multiple ways to solve this problem. There will be sort of traditional technology solutions where maybe the agent calls an MCP server that sort of manages its budget, and you can imagine normal sort of spending limits and risk controls and things like that that many businesses build. And then on blockchain, you have another layer entirely, which is this concept of programmable money and having a smart contract that could constrain the spending of an agent on chain, right? So if there is some kind of limit or allow listed payment recipients that you've approved, for example, that could be codified in a smart contract on chain. And there are folks already working on wallets that enable people to manage these capabilities so that some point in the probably very near future, you'll be able to sort of deploy an AI agent to go do something for you and arm it with a budget, so value like stablecoins on chain, but also it would be constrained in how much it could spend, and it may need special approvals for larger expenditures and so forth. And basically, the programmability would be infinite. But I think there'll be two layers. There'll be sort of like traditional technology constraints, and then where value is being exchanged on a blockchain, you can use the programmability of that blockchain to constrain the agent as well, make sure it doesn't go off the rails.
One thing that I was wondering about, like whenever we talk about blockchain, we talk about money immediately, and it feels so weird. Like, I mean, I shouldn't be saying this, but I always didn't care about money much. I basically got my salary, and then I basically the rest I was wanting to do cool geek stuff and give it out for free.
Right.
So that brings me to identity, and it brings me to validation of content as well. In the AI world, where lots of generative AI steals people's picture, steals people's audio, steals people's video, and actually remixes it. And I've not seen a single digital watermark work so far. So is this something where blockchain can help as well and make sure that, say, like I create this asset and I validate it through a blockchain asset or through a blockchain contract? I mean, that's kind of where NFT went in, but it would be much. Again, NFT was immediately like, let's make lots of money with pictures of monkeys. I don't understand what's going on there. But like as a digital creator, or like not digital creator because that's almost a dirty word as well, as an artist, digital artist. Right. I want to make sure that my data does not get ingested by OpenAI and 300 million people on ChatGPT create stuff with it without me getting anything for it.
Right.
So is that a place where blockchain can shine where current solutions don't?
This is an excellent question. It's a really complex problem space. There's like multiple faces of this. One is, if you have content and you want to be compensated for it, right? This is a radical idea that intellectual property rights still matter. How about that? This blockchain can enable you to be paid for your content. And if we create protocols where you can respond to a crawler going through your content that, whoa, you need to pay for this. That's one way that we could enable that, and you could actually receive a payment, sort of like through almost like a content vending machine sort of concept. And then another facet of this is that when you've created real, human generated content, you want to be able to verify that that was yours. And it is trivial to use a blockchain to digitally sign something and say, you know, I, Brian, have used my keys to sign whatever this content is, an image, a video, music, etc., and record that immutably on a blockchain. I think it's fair to say that the more difficult problems are not the blockchain part, but like the user experience of someone actually going and verifying that you are who you say you are. And there's like extra steps there and extra user experience problems to solve. And the chain goes all the way from like the camera taking a picture, let's say, and then signing that photograph on the hardware in the camera, and then being able to trace that like all the way through the chain to wherever the photograph ends up, like on a news website. And then for someone who wants to verify that it's real, to be able to go all the way back through the chain and say, yeah, this is a legit unedited photo. So, and just to reiterate, the part about being able to publicly put some data on a distributed database with a cryptographic signature on it, that's sort of like a solved problem. But putting that hardware in people's hands and having news organizations implement processes to verify content and discover legitimate creators, there's like a lot more to this problem space.
Well, let's end with a call to action. Like, what would you like people to stop saying about blockchain? And what would you like people to actually start doing? Like, what do you want people to play with? What do you want people to start with?
So, starting with the question of what should people stop doing or stop saying about blockchain, I think it has been a monumental failure of our industry to end up in this situation where people associate blockchain with illicit behavior or money laundering or so forth. However, the early internet was also a bit of a wild west. And I think in the technology community and beyond, it's incumbent upon us to recognize a morally neutral technology that is evolving and maturing, and recognize that it can be used for lots of worthy and moral purposes and not dismiss it out of hand. So that's kind of on one side. And the call to action, I would say, would be to think ahead about the future of payments on one frontier that are enabled by these digital technologies and are soon going to be recognized mechanisms in many governments around the world, and the advent of AI, which is accelerating so fast and is just incredible to watch. But the intersection of these two things, right? The ability to make micropayments or programmable payments on blockchain, and this idea that you might have AI agents working for you while you're asleep to plan a vacation and book your travel, means that this is a moment when we should be thinking about standards and protocols that enable like the next 25 to 100 years of solutions and applications and things that add value to people's lives. But I think it's time for people to zoom out and say, let's do some collective some brainstorming and some consensus building around this so that we can proceed in a way that enables all this value for people and doesn't end up in a state where everything exists in corporate walled gardens.
Cool. That's one thing that I'm worried about as well. Like that there seems to be an elitism, and there seems to be or an idea of elitism and an idea of gatekeeping in the whole world, because there was this whole generation of crypto bros and like cool kids that will replace the internet that basically told you about blockchain. But they're gone now. They're all AI experts out of a sudden. So that's actually quite good. So it would be interesting to see, like, do you think that that blockchain as a concept is something that can enable anyone anywhere, much like the web did, or is it still a thing that is more related to financial markets and these kind of environments?
I really appreciate that question. I tend to think that a lot of this is going to come back to financial value exchange. It is really fit for that purpose. There will be other things that blockchain is a great solution for, like certifications, right? If you earn some kind of achievement, you can put that on a blockchain, and it can never be revoked from you, and so forth. So there's other things that you can do with blockchain where it's just a perfect fit. But the opportunity to enable new modes of value exchange and trade, and for people to actually own their assets rather than them sort of existing like Schrodinger's bank account balance, where like you're not really sure if it's there or not and it's hard to observe. I think that's super powerful. And if we solve those financial problems, that just enables all sorts of other things to be done on top of it. So the value, the impact that it has on people's lives won't be limited to just value transfer. It'll enable all sorts of acceleration of development and improving the quality of people's lives that might today be constrained by financial issues.
Yeah, there is a lot of interesting things. I mean, I always remember when it comes to like ownership of video and audio, like you bought CDs and DVDs, but you never actually owned the content. You paid for it, but you had the physical DVD, and that was that. If the thing
Right.
got scratched, you have to rebuy the movie. So it feels weird that like by buying it, I don't own it. That means like if I pirate it, I don't steal it.
Yeah.
So there's a really weird concept of this like rethinking of ownership of things. Like just because you created it should get you some credit for doing for if other people use it. But
Right.
there's this weird concept where basically we create something and then we basically want to make as much money as possible with it. Movies are a great example. Like when you see like it only made 150 million on the box office and that's a failure. And you're like, wait, what?
Yeah.
you know but it's interesting that the concept of ownership has not been natural to us because we never owned anything if you think about it, unless we grew it in our garden, because
Right.
a dollar bill means you own the value of a dollar bill. Like you don't own the dollar bill itself. That still belongs to the state. So that seems to be something that people can't get their head around in physical world, and in digital world it might be even worse.
You're absolutely right. Just in the past few weeks, the number of people who have mentioned to me in passing that they're returning to their old music library that they owned and had the files on their computer instead of using a streaming service has been interesting. Like, there's something happening where people want to return not necessarily to an analog state. That's sort of another, philosophical discussion of its own, but to a point where they own something and they can listen to it as many times as they want or watch it as many times as they want, and are not just in this like infinite subscription state, right, with their corporate overlords.
I mean, it's multiplying. That's the thing. I mean, I've got a Fire Stick here from a certain company, which we won't mention. Fire Stick should give it away. But I mean, I pay for their Prime service, and basically something like, okay, cool, show me all the stuff that I can see. What I see 90% on the screen is advertising for other streaming services. I guess that's why people go back to their DVD collection, because they know they can put the thing in and watch it and not watch like 3 minutes of unskippable
Yep.
ads for other services that they could buy instead of using the one that they have. So
Yeah.
probably that's one thing where people get a bit more an ownership, and I think it's good. I think it's an interesting thing. Especially I found like MP3s that I encoded in like 1997 that are not available at all anywhere. Like, I
Right.
mean, these were from vinyls or like bands that I just managed or helped with their stuff. They never got to a main label. So in that case, it's always fun that like it seems to me like that piracy to a degree was like accidental librarians.
Yeah.
Like a lot of stuff is only still available online because somebody at one
Yes.
point pirated it, and that's where Internet Archive comes in as well. And like, where
Right.
is the boundary between those things? I found it very bizarre when Google shut down their Google Cache and basically said like, go to Wayback Machine on archive.org, and I'm like,
Right.
that's a non-for-profit company in San Francisco with a few people. Like, this is not a multi-million-dollar
Right. This
concern
is not a
that you are.
substitute. Right.
Yeah, it's really bizarre that like basically the thing that everybody was annoyed about, like that just scraped everything off the net and archived it, is now the main resource that large companies point at because they don't want to pay for storing copies of things. But yeah.
Yeah, but there was a lot of incredible curation effort that went into building those collections.
Yeah. They have a live feed now where you can see them actually scanning microfiche into digital assets. It's
Oh,
really,
very
really
cool.
good. Like, I really love that kind of thing, like where you go back to 1970s technology and bring it to the web right now.
Yeah, I remember being in the library and like using the viewer and like moving it around. Yep.
Kind of always like you went like 1 centimeter to the side and was
It was
gone.
like,
Like, it was
yep.
really bad. Like, anyways, that was great to talk to you. That was Coffee
My
with
pleasure.
Developers with Brian Whippo. We're going to see you in Berlin in a few, God,
3 weeks?
not many days to go, and lots of things to plan. So that was fun. Any last words you have for people? You want to send some greetings out?
Oh, thank you very much for having me on. It was a distinct pleasure. I'm excited to come back to WeAreDevelopers. Had a great time there in Berlin last year. Come to my talk, 402, payment required.
All right. See you then.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
Chris. Take care.